Hello. So in the last video, I introduced you to Donald Smith, Dr. Donald Smith's cultural onion, the onion model of culture. And then I told you that I was going to skip the outer layer and go straight to social authorities and then onto experiences and onto the core, because I wanted to do a series of videos about the behaviors or the signal systems later. And I realized that the reason I wanted to do that is because I figured that you would want to rush straight to the social authorities, which is exactly the opposite of what you have to do if you actually want to understand a culture. You got to go slow and sort of discipline yourself for patience. So instead of doing what I told you I was going to do, we're going to do this. I'm going to spend the next 3 or 4 videos unpacking for you the signal systems. I'll do them in bunches of 3 or 4, and this video will be a discussion of how they work, okay, or how to observe them. So here are the 12 signal systems, here, and then here are a series of small conversations we're going to have along the way. So the onion model has the core at the center, experiences to the outside of that, the social authorities, and the outermost layer, which is the only observable layer, and you're going to hear the word observe quite a lot, I think, is the behaviors. These are the things that people do. And we're particularly interested in the things that people do when they are intending to communicate. Also, and this will be a pinch point in a minute, it's also the things people do that communicate whether they intend to or not. That's going to be a little wonky in a second. I'm going to tell you something that sounds like it contradicts that, but hold on tight. So when you start to explore the behaviors, the signal systems, you need to think about 3 steps, or sort of 3 attitudes, 3 approaches. First, you want to pay attention to what, not why. When you sit down and start to observe the behaviors of a culture, the signal systems that a culture uses to communicate, you're going to find inside yourself this deep-seated predilection to try to discover why. I mean, Sherlock Holmes. You wanna get to the plot of it all. You get down to the bottom of this. Motive is of no interest to you in this step. You have no hope of understanding why, because there's so much underneath these behaviors that drive them that you will almost certainly, by almost certainly I mean 99.5% of the time, you'll come to false conclusions operating off of completely misguided and utterly irrelevant assumptions. You don't want to think about why. You want to think about what. That man was angrily yelling at the other man. That's a why thing. He's angry. That man suddenly began to speak much more loudly, using this particular hand gesture, with his eyebrows pursed, and the other man stood completely still and did not respond. There's a lot that could be going on there. Depending on the cultural milieu you're in, there are a lot of reasons why a man could be raising his voice. It could be anger, it could not be anger. It's interesting here where I live, and we'll call it Narnia. When I come home, I have to take a couple minutes to take off my pressure suit, because there's a certain degree of animation and volume and intensity that is expected for the conveyance of honesty. In particular, in certain settings, the settings I often find myself in. So then and also the verbal language doesn't use a lot of tricks and flowers. Most of the meaning is conveyed through an assumed set of things we all already know, because we don't want to say them, we don't want to shame each other. So when I come home to my family who wasn't out in the world all day, I'm often short because I'm using very short I'm not conveying my information through my words. And then also, I'm using the body language and kinesics appropriate to this place, which can seem extremely aggressive in the house. But it's not out there. And I don't mean it that way in. You follow? You can't ascribe purpose or intent to the behaviors that you're observing. You just have to say what you see and not say what you think about what you see. Okay? And you gotta allow time to do that. You don't need to just glance around on your way, or like while you're speeding through Little Cambodia in your city. You don't need to notice a couple of signs and 2 or 3 colors and be like, these colors are important because I saw them once driving. you need to sit in it and take a lot of observations and make a lot of considerations and give yourself time to notice a lot, to notice many of one thing. I'll teach you how to do that later in another video, but to notice many of one thing. And then over time, if you were to move to Cambodia or move into Little Cambodia, which I think might be a great idea, you need to give yourself time to adjust. You need to consciously take steps to adjust. Later on when we're talking about cultural intelligence, that's going to involve CQ strategy and CQ action. But you need to move toward the way the culture that you are trying to engage, the way they use these signals. You don't need to ask them to come toward you. You need to adjust. All right? So 3 steps. Pay attention to what, not why. Give yourself time to observe and adjust to the behaviors. What is it you're observing, though? It's very difficult to just go look. Go sit in the, like no one sends a biologist out into the woods and says, what'd you see? The biologist goes out with a plan. The botanist goes out with a plan to observe certain kinds of flora. The zoologist, certain kinds of fauna. You go out to observe something. There's a thing there. You're looking for something. You're not just looking at it. You're looking for things. What are you looking for? You're looking for engagement, interaction, and communication. And Don Smith, Dr. Don Smith, will contend in his books. These are 2 books that, if you are interested in this topic, you really should read. Make Haste Slowly by Don Smith, but also especially Creating Understanding by Don Smith. Excellent works on this topic. Creating Understanding. When people are engaging or interacting or communicating, Dr. Smith insists that they're doing so using one or more, almost always more, using one or usually several of these signal systems. Let me read them to you. Verbal, that's what I'm doing with you right now. But I'm also doing kinesic. Yeah, now you can see the body language and the facials and the hands. Verbal, written, numeric, like that, indicating order. Pictorial, artifactual, that's the objects that are used or that have meaning or purpose, and where you put them and why you put them there. When someone says set the table, they're assuming a culturally accepted order of the objects on the table. When you do it a different way, it's then unacceptable and actually seems either disrespectful or lazy, or you're communicating something by doing it a different way. Every culture has a way to set the table. Audio, sounds other than speech, like paralinguistics, like Also music or just sound effects, or like when you're impatient in some cultures. Audio. Kinesic, I already mentioned body language. Optical, the use of light and darkness and their respective meanings in different times and places. Tactile, the use of touch. Touch is distinct from kinesics in that when I use body language, you are perceiving it through your eyes. When I use touch, you're perceiving it differently. I'm still using my body and communicating with it, but you are perceiving, you're not looking at my hand on your arm, you feel my hand on your arm. The communication is passing through a different channel. Temporal, how time is used, how time is inhabited, how people think about time, what's late, what's early, is time past, is time spent, is time just a thing? Spatial, how close, how far, how to use space, where to put things in space. And then olfactory, the taste and smell. The higher something is on this scale, the more conscious you are of its use, both you using it and it being used to communicate to you. The lower it is, the less conscious you are, but the more it is believed. So that if there is a contradiction between 2 signals, the lower one is the one that's believed. Sometimes people communicate using 2 signals or 3 signals at the same time, and they're intentionally saying one thing with one and another thing with the other. Often people in this culture will do that to avoid shaming you. They will, to avoid making you look like an idiot. They'll say words that everyone, and they expect you to, even though you don't, everyone knows they don't mean. And so it's not a lie because no one's deceived by it, except you because you don't know. But then with another signal system that's lower on this list, they will communicate their actual intent. Sometimes people aren't meaning it. This is often brought to light in shows like Lie to Me, or back when Bill Clinton was president, and it was on the news a lot. People were talking about his nose turning red and the way he looked up, right? Body language cues demonstrating that I'm saying one thing, but I mean another. Sometimes you just do that unconsciously, and the lower the signal that you're using down here, that's the one to be believed. However, not every behavior is a signal system. I mentioned in the last video, like someone having the hiccups isn't intended to communicate, and no one in a given culture, in any given culture, would be like, hiccups are an intentional communication of affection. That's a behavior that is not a signal. To be a signal, it has to be deliberate, and that doesn't always mean that. For example, if I am saying that I really, really enjoy watching baseball. Okay, so my words were deliberate, as was my kinesic. My kinesic is the one that you believed. I don't like baseball. However, sometimes I use kinesics and I use words, and the kinesics are not deliberate. However, it can be used deliberately, and it can be used deliberately and understood as conveying meaning, and that's the second piece. The signal system is understood and accepted by members of a culture to convey meaning, to be a means of communicating. It's interpersonal, meaning it's not just a person on their own making noises and waving their hands around. It's intended to be part of a two-part dialogue. It's also from person to person. It's not just from person to animal, for example. And then it's comprised of its own vocabulary and syntax. I remember when I was receiving this training, I pushed back on this one, and there are others who push back on this one too. But Dr. Smith contends that every one of these has a vocabulary, not of words, but that within a given culture, the kinesics have, for example, different gestures mean different things, and so each one is like a word. It's a vocabulary unit, and the combination of them in different ways is an understood and accepted syntax. The combination of these, of a given set of behaviors within one signal, is supposed to also convey something. This one I feel a little meh about, but I'm not the anthropologist. What I want you to take away from this is everything I said, but also what I really want you to take away from it is that all this communication, all human communication, can be said to happen along these signals. When you are beginning to try to explore a culture and try to understand what's in a group of people's heart, what's driving them and driving their wanter, that's a really important question. That's the number one question Jesus asked, is what do you want? And when you find yourself beginning to ask a culture that question, you can't skip the straight up, honest, just doing the work, just making the observations, just putting the time in observing, considering them, honoring them by not importing your assumptions on them. As you do that, it's okay to just kind of sit there and try to take it in. It's far more effective, however, to go at it understanding that I'm gonna walk into this restaurant, this Kurdish restaurant, and I'm going to observe what colors are dominantly used, and I'm going to check out 2 other Kurdish restaurants this month and see if those colors are also dominant. I might even ask somebody what those colors mean, or I could look that up later. But I'm going to allow myself some time to make some observations about the use of color or the use of sound, or what does this sound mean? I hear this sound a lot. What does it mean? The what does it mean comes later, but give yourself opportunity to run into the sounds present in a culture. Think about, if you're exploring Chinese culture, like watch honest to goodness Chinese movies for Chinese people. Watch kung fu movies that are famous in China, and listen to the way they use music, and when they use music, and why they use music, and what different sounds convey, and what happens when different sounds happen. Give yourself opportunity to observe these things. Across the next several videos, I'll unpack each one and help you understand what it is you're looking for. All right? Have fun.